Hey guys, tonight we're climbing up into the cab of an old pickup on a 2-lane highway somewhere in the middle of the country, the sun going down orange behind the grain silos, and there is a little box bolted up under the dashboard with a coiled microphone hanging off the side of it. It hisses softly, a warm wash of static, and then, out of that hiss, a stranger's voice comes crackling through, easy and unhurried, asking if anybody out there has got their ears on tonight. We are drifting back into the 1970s, into those strange and wonderful years when America talked to itself over the airwaves, one channel at a time. This is the story of the CB radio craze, the first social network the country ever really had, long before anybody dreamed of a screen. Before we settle in, I want to say a real thank you to the listener who suggested this one. You send me the kindest ideas, and truly, this little channel only grows because of the notes you leave down in the comments, telling me what you remember, what you miss, and what you would like to hear about next. It means more to me than I know how to say, so if you feel like it, and only if you feel like it, you might tap that like button, maybe subscribe, and let me know where you are listening from tonight and what the weather is doing outside your window. And if you would rather just drift off with these stories in the dark, the channel is on Spotify now too, so you can find us there through the link in the description, whenever the mood strikes you. Now go ahead and get comfortable, turn the lights down low, switch on a fan for that soft steady hush of white noise, pull the blanket up, find the cool side of the pillow, and let your shoulders come down from wherever the day left them. And let yourself wonder, the way you might on a quiet night like this one. What did it feel like to be alone on a dark highway at 2 a.m. and to hear a friendly voice come out of nowhere just to keep you company for a while? What did a truck stop smell like at midnight, all diesel and coffee and eggs on the griddle? What on earth did people find to say to one another, strangers sliding past each other at 70 miles an hour, never once seeing a face? And what was it about that one little box under the dashboard that made a whole country want to reach out and talk? And just like that, it is 1976. The CB is already warmed up and humming under the dash. Somewhere up ahead, a trucker is calling out a smoky report. The highway is unrolling into the dark and the night is only just getting started. Let's start with the box itself, because that is where all of it began. It is a small metal unit, not much bigger than a loaf of bread, bolted up under the dashboard or hung beneath the radio, with a row of knobs across the face of it and a coiled cord that ends in a heavy black microphone. You remember the weight of that microphone in your hand, the little button on the side you pressed with your thumb, the way the whole thing lit up with a soft amber glow when you switched it on. It hummed, it hissed. It filled the quiet cab with the sound of 100 faraway conversations, all of them just out of reach until you turned the dial and found one. For a lot of people, that box was the first thing they touched in the morning and the last voice they heard at night. And somehow it never once felt like a machine. It felt like company. You knew that box the way you know an old friend, by touch alone. In the dark you could find every knob without looking, your fingers moving over the volume and the squelch and the channel dial the way they moved over the gear shift, out of pure habit worn in over 1,000 miles. There was the little needle that jumped when someone was talking, swinging up bright and eager, and the dial light that glowed just enough to keep you company, without spoiling your eyes for the road. The whole thing gave off a faint warmth after a few hours, a gentle heat you could feel with the back of your hand, and on a cold night that small warmth felt almost alive, like it was riding along beside you on purpose. It smelled a certain way too, that box. Warm dust and warm plastic and the faint sweetness of the little tubes inside doing their quiet work. When you first switched it on, there was a soft pop, and then that rush of static came pouring in, And you learned to love that sound the way you love rain on a roof. It was never really silence in there. It was the sound of the whole country breathing at once, all those faraway voices bleeding together into one soft wash, and you could just let it run in the background for hours, keeping you awake, keeping you steady, reminding you the world was still out there turning. Your mother might have had one bolted under the dash of the family sedan, tuned low while she ran her errands. Your uncle surely had one and swore by it. The fellow at the filling station had one crackling behind the register. It got so a truck without a CB looked half-dressed, and a driver without one felt it, that little loneliness of rolling down the highway with no way to reach out. Because that was the thing about the box. It was not just for listening, it was for reaching. One press of that thumb and your voice went out into the night to land in some stranger's cab a mile ahead, and his came back to yours, and for as long as you both held the road, you were not alone. Think about how strange and lovely that was, and how far we have come from it. We carry the whole world in our pockets now, a little glass rectangle that can find any voice on earth in a second. But it is a private thing, that glass. You hunch over it alone. The old box was nothing like that. It hung right out there in the open, its voices filling the whole cab so anybody riding with you heard them too, the kids in the back seat and the dog and all. It was a shared thing, a thing you tuned to together, and there was no scrolling past anyone. You simply took the next voice that came, whoever it turned out to be, and you made room for it. You had to learn its little moods, of course. It faded when you dropped down into a valley and swelled back strong when you climbed a rise, so that a conversation would come and go with the shape of the land itself. It picked up strange, far-off signals on certain nights, skip they called it, when the airwaves bounced funny, and a voice from 3 states over would come drifting in clear as your neighbour, gone again before you could answer. You learned to catch what you could and let the rest go. You learned that the box gave you the country in pieces, and that the pieces were enough. And when the drive was over and you pulled into the yard and switched it off, there was always that small moment of quiet, the static dying away, the dialight fading, the warmth of it slowly cooling under your hand. The cab went silent in a way it had not been all night, and you felt the absence of all those voices at once, like stepping out of a warm kitchen into the cold. But you knew they would be there again tomorrow. You only had to reach up and switch the little box back on, and the whole crackling, humming, wide-awake country would come rushing back to keep you company. It is a simple kind of magic, and it is the kind we do not quite make anymore. Now comes the first real decision, and it is a strangely wonderful one. Before you could say a single word on the air, you needed a handle, a name of your own to send out into the dark. Nobody used their real name out there. You were whoever you decided to be. Maybe you were Silver Fox, or a Night Owl, or Cornbread, or Rubber Duck. Maybe you named yourself after your truck, or your town, or some private joke only. Somewhere 100 miles off, a person you would never meet had just learned to know you by the name you gave yourself, and would remember it, and would be glad to hear it again. It is a small thing to name yourself and be answered, but on a dark road it felt like being born a little. It is your very first time now, thumb hovering over the button, heart going a little faster than you would admit. There is a whole etiquette to this, a rhythm you have to learn by listening before you ever dare to join in. You press the button, and for that moment the whole channel is yours and the static goes silent, waiting. Breaker 19, you say, Breaker 19, and then you let go and wait to see if anybody answers back. Come on, come back, go ahead. The words feel foreign in your mouth the first few times, a little silly even, and then one night they do not anymore. One night a voice answers you warm and easy, like you have known each other for years, and something clicks into place, and just like that you are part of it. It is a nervousness that is harder to find now. That first hello into a room full of strangers. You listened for a long while before you spoke. That was the way of it. You sat with the mic in your lap and the static in your ears, and you learned the shape of the talk, who broke in and how, when to wait and when to jump. You heard how the old hands did it, quick and easy, keying up and saying their piece and letting go, never hogging the air, never talking over a soul. And you heard the greenhorns too, the ones who held the button too long or forgot to say who they were, and you swore quietly to yourself that you would not sound like that. There was a music to it once you caught on. You pressed the button and gave the channel a half-second to settle before you spoke. So the first word of you did not get swallowed. You said your handle so folks knew who was talking. You kept it short because the air belonged to everyone, and hanging on too long was the surest way to mark yourself a fool. And when you were done, you said so, over, or come back, or go ahead, handing the channel off clean, like passing a cup of coffee down a table without spilling a drop. Your thumb learned the button before your mouth learned the words. That little press became automatic, the way a light switch is, so that you could reach for the mic in the pitch dark and key up and speak without ever taking your eyes off the road. And there was a feeling in it, a small jolt every time, the knowledge that the moment you pressed down your voice left the cab entirely and went flying out into the night to land wherever it would. You never quite knew who was listening. That was the thrill of it and the terror of it both. The first few tries your voice came out thin and unsure. You cleared your throat too much. You said breaker 19 and then lost your nerve and let go before anybody could answer, and sat there red-faced in an empty cab, glad no one could see you. But you tried again the next mile and the next, and somewhere in there the fear wore off. You stopped rehearsing your words before you said them. You started sounding like yourself. And then came the night it all turned. You keyed up, tired and a little lonesome, and sent your handle into the dark, not really expecting much. And a voice came back, an old trucker most likely, calm as still water, and he said your handle right back to you and asked how you were making out tonight, easy as anything, like the two of you were leaning on the same fence, and that was it. That was the whole doorway swinging open. You talked for 20 miles about nothing at all, and it felt like the finest conversation of your life, because you had finally stepped through, finally become one of the voices instead of one of the listeners. Think how much braver that was than we remember. Because there was no undoing it out there. You could not draft your words and shape them and read them over 3 times before you sent them off. You pressed the button and you spoke, live, into whoever happened to be listening, and it was done. You could not take it back. There is a kind of courage in that, in speaking plainly and at once to strangers, that we have quietly let slip away. We have so many ways to hide now, to think and rewrite and delete. Out there you just spoke and lived with it, and mostly folks were kind. That first real hello into the static stayed with people their whole lives. They could tell you the stretch of road they were on, the hour of the night, the very words they used. Because it was more than learning a machine. It was the moment you found out that a stranger 100 miles off would answer you warmly for no reason at all, and that the dark was full of company if you only had the nerve to speak into it. And once you knew that, you were never quite so alone on a highway again. You had your ears on now, and your voice out there, and a whole crackling country ready to say hello back. Let's talk about Channel 19, because that is where the country really lived. Out of all the channels on the dial, this was the one the truckers claimed. The great rolling river of talk that ran alongside every interstate in America. Twist your dial to 19 and you were never alone again. There was always somebody up ahead and somebody coming up behind, calling out what the road looked like, where the trouble was, how the weather was holding. It was crowded and fast and full of overlapping voices, and you learned to catch what you needed from the noise the way you learned to hear one friend across a loud party. That channel was a living thing, humming across the whole nation at once, and no matter where you drove, it was already there waiting, warm and busy and awake. You could feel the difference the moment you landed on it. The quiet channels had their long silences, their occasional lone voice drifting through. But 19 was never quiet. It came alive under your thumb the instant you turned to it. A churn of talk and static and laughter and calling out. Dozens of voices weaving in and out, near ones loud and far ones faint, all sharing the same crowded stretch of air. It was the sound of the highway thinking out loud, and after a while you could not drive without it. At first the crowd of it overwhelmed you. It seemed like pure chaos, everybody talking at once. None of it meant for you, but you learned. Your ear sorted it out on its own, the way it learns to pick your own name out of a noisy room. You caught the words that mattered, the mile marker, the warning, the question aimed at anyone. You let the rest wash past, and soon you were part of the current yourself, breaking in when you had something to add, dropping back to listen when you did not, riding the river along with everyone else. The wonderful thing was how it moved with you. As you rolled down the interstate, the voices ahead of you would fade and drop away, their rigs pulling too far off, while fresh ones swelled up bright as you came into their range. So the conversation was always turning over, always renewing itself, a rolling handoff down the length of the road. The fellow who warned you about the ice at the 80-mile marker was gone by 90, but by then a new voice had risen to warn the folks behind you, and you passed the word along yourself, and so it went, mile after mile, the whole living chain of it never breaking. You came to know the flavour of it at different hours too. In the grey of early morning it was all business, tired drivers checking the road, murmuring low over their first coffee. Through the day it filled up loud and busy, quick and sharp, everybody in a hurry. But at night it softened. The traffic thinned, the voices spread out, and the talk turned gentle and unhurried. Folks with long dark hours ahead of them settling in to keep each other company. Same channel, different soul, depending on when you tuned in. And it was the same everywhere. That was the marvel of it. You could start your morning in one part of the country and drive clear into another, cross rivers and state lines and time zones, and 19 was there the whole way, always full, always awake. The accents changed as you went, the drawl thickening or the vowels going flat, the local names for things shifting under your wheels. But the river never ran dry. Wherever there was a highway, there was 19 humming above it, and wherever you were, you belonged the moment you tuned in. We reach for something like it now, I suppose, in all our feeds and threads, that endless scroll of strangers talking at once. But it is not quite the same, is it? What we have now you consume alone, silent, thumbing past 1,000 voices that never know you passed. 19 you rode inside of. You were in the current, not above it. Every voice on it was somewhere real, in a cab or a car within a few miles of yours, sharing the very same road and the very same night. Close enough that you might pass their taillights within the hour. It was not a wall of strangers, it was neighbours you had not met yet, all moving in the same direction, so you kept it tuned there, 19, hour after hour, the way some folks keep a light on in the window. It asked nothing of you and gave you the whole country for company. And on the long, empty stretches, when the road ran flat and dark and forever and your eyes grew heavy, it was the sound of 19 that kept you going. That steady, busy hum of nation talking to itself, reminding you with every crackle and every friendly voice that you were part of, something wide and warm and wide awake, rolling along together through the dark toward morning. Now here is the part that made outsiders lean in and listen. The CB had a whole language of its own, and half the fun was learning to speak it. 10-4 meant you understood. What is your 20 meant where are you? You called the miles you had left your handle for the trip, and you signed off with catch you on the flip-flop, meaning I will talk to you on the way back. A good buddy was anyone friendly, and there were words for everything, for the police, for the way stations, for the pretty scenery and the empty road ahead. None of it was written down anywhere. You picked it up by listening, the way a child picks up the songs of a place, until one day you realized you were speaking it fluently without ever having studied a word. It was a language that belonged to no one and everyone all at once. At first it went right over your head, a wall of odd words and numbers that everyone else seemed to understand but you. Somebody would say there was a bear taking pictures at the county line, and you would puzzle over it a mile before you worked out he meant a trooper with a radar gun. Somebody would ask another fellow to give him a shout on the flip side, and you would file it away and figure it out later. But that was the pleasure of it. Every phrase you cracked was a little door opening, and the whole thing came to you slowly, gently, the way you learn the ways of a new town. There was a poetry in a lot of it when you stopped to notice. The police were bears, and so a trooper hiding to catch speeders was a bear in the bushes, and one up in a helicopter was a bear in the air, and the whole thing became a kind of running story you were all telling together. Coffee was go-go juice, a cup of it black. The truck stop was the choke and puke said with affection, never spite. There were words for the weather and words for the traffic and words for the long empty stretch where nothing happened at all. A plain drive became an adventure just for the language laid over it. Nobody taught it to you. That was the thing. There was no book, no teacher, no lesson. You learned it the way you learned to whistle or to skip stones, by being around folks who already knew, catching a phrase here and a phrase there, trying one out yourself and getting it a little wrong and getting corrected kindly and slowly over weeks and months, growing fluent without ever once trying to. Then came the day you said something in it without thinking, easy and natural, and caught yourself, and realized with a little jolt of pride that you spoke the language now. You were in. And it drew a line, gently, between those who knew and those who did not. Not a mean line, not a wall. But when you heard someone stumbling over the words, saying it stiff and wrong, you knew they were new, and you were kind to them the way the old hands had been kind to you. And when you heard someone use it smooth and easy and right, you knew you were among your own. It was a password in a way of knowing your people by their words. Speak it well, and a stranger trusted you a little more, welcomed you a little quicker. The children took to it fastest of all, as children always do with the secret words of grown-ups. They soaked it up like a sponge and spoke it in the yard and worked it into their games, playing bears and truckers on their bicycles, calling 10-4 across the driveway. Grandmother said good buddy. Whole families spoke it at supper. It leaked out of the trucks and into the culture until half the country was using words that had been born on Channel 19 without the first idea where they had come from. We do this still, you know. Every little world we make spins off its own words, its own shorthand, its own way of talking that marks who belongs. But so much of it lives on screens now, typed and abbreviated, read but rarely spoken aloud. The CB language you had to say. It lived in the mouth and the ear, passed voice to voice down the highway, warmed by the person saying it. You could hear a fellow's whole self in how he said his 10-4, weary or cheerful or dry as dust. The words carried more than their meaning. They carried the man. So you learned to speak it, and speaking it made you part of the family. It was a language with no home and no owner, drifting free across the whole country on the airwaves, and anybody who wanted in had only to listen a while and start trying. There were real sweetness in that, in a tongue that belonged to nobody and welcomed everybody, that asked no fee but a little patience and a little kindness. And long after the craze faded, folks who lived through it still had the words tucked away, and would smile to hear a 10-4, remembering the crowded, crackling, friendly air where they first learned to speak it. Picture them now, the men and women who practically built this whole world. The long-haul truckers were the heart of the CB, the ones who lived on those channels day and night because the highway was their office, their living room, their whole entire world for weeks at a time. They knew every mile of the interstate by feel. They knew which diner had the good pie and which grade would slow you to a crawl, and which stretch of road went on forever with nothing but stars. And they carried each other through all of it by voice, passing warnings and jokes and directions down the line like a bucket brigade that never ended. To a nervous first-timer, a trucker's calm voice in the dark was the steadiest thing in the world. They had seen everything the road could do, and they were still willing to talk you through it. Theirs was a lonesome life when you really thought about it, and the CB was the thing that made it bearable. Weeks away from home, from wife and children in their own bed, sleeping in the cab, eating at counters, watching the same white lines unspooled day after day after day. A body could go a little strange with that much solitude. But they had their ears on always, and that changed everything. The channel was their front porch and their tavern and their church all at once. A place to be among their own kind, even parked alone in a dark lot, 1,000 miles from anyone who knew their real name. They had a knowledge in them that could not be taught, only earned, mile by hard mile. They knew how the road behaved in rain and in ice, and in the blinding white of a whiteout. They knew where the long climbs were and how to take them, where the wind came screaming across the open flats, where the fog pooled in the low places before dawn. And all of it they gave away for free, calling it out to whoever was near, watching over the greenhorns and the family cars and the little sedans that had no business being out in such weather. Slow it down through the curve up ahead, they would say, easy now, and a nervous driver would take a breath and trust that voice and make it through. You could hear the miles in how they talked. Slow and unhurried, most of them. A little dry, a little wry, in no rush about anything because rushing was for folks who had somewhere to be. They had learned the road's own patience, and they had a gentleness under the gruffness that surprised you the first time you met it. A real tenderness toward anybody struggling out there, because they knew better than anyone how cruel the road could be and how far help could sometimes seem. They looked after their own too, in ways that would move you. A driver broke down on a dark shoulder would have 3 rigs pull over inside the hour. Folks who knew that next time it might be them stranded out there in the cold. They shared what they had, coffee and tools and company and directions, and asked nothing back. There was a code among them older than the CB itself, a plain law of the road that said you stopped for a fellow driver in trouble, and the radio only made it easier to live by. To a family rolling along on vacation, a trucker on the channel was a guardian angel with a diesel engine. He pointed out the clean rest stops and the good places to eat. He warned you off the speed traps and the rough patches. He answered the children's shy little voices with a warmth that made their whole trip. And when your exit came, he sent you off with a word of kindness. Safe travels now. You all take care. And you drove away feeling looked after by a stranger whose face you never saw and never would. We have voices in our cars again now, of course. They tell us where to turn and where the traffic is snarled and how long until we arrive. Cool and precise and always right. But there is no one in them. They do not know the road. They only know the map. They have never white-knuckled a mountain grade in a snowstorm, or seen the sun come up over the plains after driving all night. The trucker knew. When he told you to slow down, it was because he had earned the right to tell you, out there in the real dark, in the real weather, with his own hands on the wheel. So tip your hat to them, those kings of the long dark road, the ones who built this crackling country of voices and kept it running with their kindness. They were the backbone of the whole thing, the steady heart of Channel 19, always up ahead and always coming behind, always watching out. And on the loneliest stretch of your life, at the worst hour of the night, one of them would key up out of nowhere just to ask how you were holding up, and mean it. That was the gift they gave, over and over to anyone with their ears on. And it is a gift worth remembering, in a world that has grown so much quieter between strangers. Let's go back to where the craze truly caught fire, to the long cold lines at the gas pumps. In the winter of 1973, the fuel stopped flowing easy, and suddenly a full tank was something you had to hunt for. Stations ran dry with no warning, and a driver could lose half a day searching. So the truckers did what they always did. They got on the CB and told each other where the gas was, which station still had some and which had already hung up the closed sign. And when the country dropped the speed limit down to 55 to save fuel, the CB became the way everybody watched for the law together. What started as truckers helping truckers spread to every ordinary driver who wanted in, and almost overnight, everyone wanted a rig of their own. It is hard to picture now, the worry of those months. You planned your whole day around the tank. You did not run errands without wondering whether you would find a drop to get home on. The lines snaked out of the stations and down the block and around the corner, engines idling, tempers fraying, folks sitting an hour or more just for the chance to fill up, and half the time the pump ran dry before you reached it, and you had to start all over somewhere else. It wore on people. It made the whole country feel a little smaller and a little more afraid. But the truckers had an answer, the way they always did. They had the CB, and they had eyes on every road, and they simply started telling each other the truth of things. There is fuel at the station off the third exit, one would say, but they are near out. The place by the river still has plenty, come on over. And the word ran down the line faster than any newspaper could print it, fresher than any radio report, because it came straight from a fellow who had just laid eyes on the pump 10 minutes before. It was neighbour helping neighbour on a national scale, and it worked. Ordinary folks watching all this took notice. They saw the truckers gliding past the worst of the trouble, always seeming to know where the fuel was, always a step ahead, and they wanted in on it. So they went out and bought units of their own, mounted them under their own dashboards, and discovered the whole warm, crackling world that had been humming above the highway all along. What had been a working man's tool became everybody's, almost overnight, born out of a shortage and a worry and the plain human wish to look out for one another. Then came the 55, To save the precious fuel, the country slowed itself down, dropped the limit lower than anyone was used to, and put troopers out to enforce it. And that changed the CB forever, because now everybody, trucker and traveller alike, had the same quiet business on the channel, watching for the law and passing the word. A bear at the overpass, someone would call, and every driver in earshot would ease off the pedal and coast on through safe, then speed back up once the coast was clear and pass the favour along to the folks behind them. It was not really about beating the law, though that was how it looked from the outside. It was about belonging to something, about being in on it together, about the little thrill of a whole highway looking after each other against the same small trouble. A stranger a mile ahead would key up just to save you a ticket, someone you would never meet, never see, never be able to thank. And you did the same for the folks behind you without a second thought. It knit the road together, that shared little game, turned a lane full of strangers into something more like a team. There is a lesson in it looking back. It took a hard season to make it happen, the shortage and the worry and the long cold lines. But out of that hardship came one of the warmest things the country ever built, a whole network of ordinary people deciding all at once and without anyone telling them to, that they would help each other through. The trouble passed, as trouble does. The pumps flowed free again. The worst of it faded into memory. But the CB stayed and grew and filled up with millions of new voices, because folks had discovered something in that hard winter. They did not want to give up. We turn to our screens now when trouble comes, refresh the maps, read the reports, and it is faster and finer than anything the old channel could manage. But it is a lonely kind of knowing, isn't it? Staring at the little glass alone. Back then the news of where to find fuel came in a human voice, warm and near, from a fellow who wished you well and expected nothing back. And maybe that is what really lit the Craze. Not the gas, not the speed limit, but the discovering that in a hard time, a stranger on the radio would help you for no reason at all, and that you could help him right back. Once folks had tasted that, they simply could not let it go. It is late afternoon now, and the word comes crackling down the line. Smoky at the 78-mile marker. You know exactly what it means. Smoky was the police, named for the wide-brimmed hat the state troopers wore, the very same hat as the bear on the fire safety posters. And so the police became bears, and there were bears in the bushes and bears in the air and bears taking pictures, and the whole highway played this long, gentle, rolling game of watching out for each other. It was not really about breaking the law so much as belonging to a club that looked after its own. A stranger 100 miles ahead would key up his mic just to save you a ticket, someone you would never meet and never thank. That kind of everyday kindness between strangers is a rarer thing now. The words for it grew rich and playful over the years, a whole vocabulary of the road and its watchers. A bear in the bushes was one hidden off the shoulder waiting to catch you. A bear in the air was a spotter up in a plane or a helicopter. Taking pictures meant running the radar. A plane wrapper was an unmarked car, and there was a special warning in that one, because a plane wrapper could sneak up on you before you knew it. Every kind of trooper had its name, and the naming turned the whole business from a worry into something more like sport, a game you all played together against the same friendly opponent. And it truly was a game, played the length of the country all day and all night. Somebody up ahead spotted a bear and called it out, and the warning rolled backward down the line from cab to cab, each driver passing it along to the ones behind, so that a trooper who set up in the morning was known to every driver for 50 miles inside the hour. You slowed for the danger zone and sped back up past it, and you did it in company. everybody easing off together like a great herd moving as one, then picking back up once the way was clear. Here is the part that stays with you, though. The whole thing ran on a kindness that expected nothing back. The fellow who called out the bear ahead was not doing it for you in particular. He did not know you. He would never meet you, would never hear your thanks, would be 20 miles gone before you even reach the spot he warned you of. He did it because that was how it was done, because someone had done it for him 100 times, because on the highway you looked out for the folks around you as plainly as you breathed. It was generosity with no name attached to it, given freely to strangers, over and over, all day long. You felt part of something the first time you passed a warning along yourself. You caught the word from up ahead, keyed up, and sent it on back to the drivers behind you, and just like that you were in the chain. One link among thousands, doing your small part to look after people you would never see. It was a fine feeling, that. It made the long anonymous highway feel less like a river of strangers all rushing past each other and more like a neighbourhood, a place where folks kept an eye out and lent a hand. The troopers knew all about it, of course. They knew the drivers were talking, knew the warnings ran up and down the line, and mostly they took it in stride as part of the game themselves. There was a kind of understanding in it, an old dance between the watchers and the watched, more good-natured than not. Nobody much wanted anybody hurt. It was really just a highway full of ordinary folks trying to get where they were going, looking out for one another against a small and ordinary trouble, and finding a little fun and a little fellowship in the doing of it. We warn each other still, in our way. The little maps in our cars flag the trouble now, chime softly to tell us where the law waits, sharing the word among millions who never know each other at all. And it is clever, and it is useful, and it is utterly without warmth. No one is on the other end of it. No tired voice, no dry chuckle, no fellow traveller wishing you well. Back then the warning came from a person, and you could hear his whole self in the saying of it, and you sent your thanks out into the dark even knowing he was already gone, just because it felt right to. So that afternoon warning crackles down the line, smoky at the 78, and you ease off and roll on through safe, and you pass the word to the folks behind you, and the great rolling game goes on the way it did for years. It was never really about the ticket. It was about a whole country of strangers deciding, mile after mile, to be a little kind to one another for no reason at all. And that, more than the slang or the songs or any of it, was the true heart of the thing, and the part we have most quietly let slip away. Now it is the deep middle of the night, the loneliest hour on any road. The world outside your windshield has narrowed down to 2 cones of headlight, and the white lines sliding past. Everyone you love is asleep, and this is when the CB showed you its softest side, because you were never truly alone out there, not if you had your ears on. Somewhere in that darkness, another set of tail lights, another tired soul fighting the same heavy eyelids, and you would key up and say a few words just to hear a voice say a few back. You talked about nothing at all. The weather, the coffee, how far you both had to go, and it was enough. It was more than enough. There is particular comfort in a kind voice in the dark, and the CB gave it away for free. There is a certain kind of tired that only comes at that hour, when the body wants sleep and cannot have it, when the road blurs soft at the edges and the mind starts to drift towards strange places. The radio helped, the music helped, the coffee helped, but nothing helped like a voice, a living human voice, right there in the dark with you, awake when the whole rest of the world had gone under. It reached into that loneliness and warmed it, the way a small fire warms a big cold room, not by chasing all the dark away, but by giving you somewhere to sit close. You did not talk about anything that mattered. That was never the point. You talked about the mist coming up off the fields, or how bad the coffee was at the last stop, or the town you were both trying to reach before dawn. You talked about your rig and his rig and the weather up ahead. Small things, nothing things. But said easy and slow into the dark from one tired soul to another, those small things were a kindness beyond price. They said plainly, I am here, and you are here, and neither of us is quite so alone as we thought. Something happened to people at that hour that did not happen in daylight. They grew gentler. They dropped their guard. The quick, sharp, busy talk of the afternoon channel softened into something slower and truer, and folks who would never open up to a stranger over a cup of coffee found themselves, at 2 a.m. on a dark highway, telling a voice they had never seen about the thing sitting heavy on their hearts, the son who was not doing well, the stretch they had been going through, the long road home and all the miles still left in it, and the voice on the other end just listened and understood, because it was out there in the same dark carrying its own quiet load. There was a freedom in it, in the not seeing. You never had to meet these folks. You would peel off at your exit and they at theirs, and that would be the end of it. 2 voices that touched for an hour in the night and drifted apart forever. And somehow that made it easier to be honest, easier to be kind, easier to say the true soft thing you would swallow back in the hard light of day. The dark and the distance made a little room where a stranger could be a friend for an hour. No strings, no history, nothing owed. Just company, freely given when company was needed most. You would ride along together for a good while sometimes, 2 rigs a mile apart, talking low and easy, keeping each other awake through the worst of the night. And when at last one of you had to turn off, there was a real feeling in the parting. A small ache even, saying so long now, you take care, drive safe, to a person you had come to know so well and would never once lay eyes on. You watched their taillights peel away into the dark, and the cab felt quieter after, and you were grateful for them. This stranger who had kept you company through the loneliest hour, and you sent a little wish after them down the road. We have 1,000 ways to reach each other now at 2 a.m, and somehow the nights feel lonelier than ever. We scroll in the dark, alone in the glow, watching the world go by without a single voice to answer us back. But out there on the old highway, in the deep of the night, a tired stranger would key up just to keep you company, and mean it, and ask for nothing but your voice in return. It was the simplest thing. 2 people, awake in the dark, saying small kind nothings to each other so that neither had to be alone. And it may have been the truest gift the whole crackling world of the CB ever gave. On the loneliest road, at the loneliest hour, it whispered that you were not alone, and you never forgot the ones who told you so. Let's talk about the song that turned a subculture into a sensation. In 1975, a singer named C.W. McCall put out a tune called Convoy, told entirely in CB slang, about a great line of trucks rolling across the country and blowing right past the roadblocks. It went straight to number 1. Suddenly the language of the highway was pouring out of every car radio in America, and people who had never driven a truck in their lives found themselves saying 10-4 and good buddy at the dinner table. Kids wanted rigs, families wanted rigs. Housewives and dentists and school teachers went out and bought units and gave themselves handles, and the airwaves filled up with millions of brand new voices all at once. What had belonged to the truckers now belonged to everyone, and for a few shining years the whole country was listening in. You could not get away from it that year. It came on the radio in the car, in the kitchen, in the barber shop, that rolling rhythm and that gravelly voice reeling off the slang like a story told over the mic itself. Children who had never seen the inside of a truck cab sang along to every word. Folks who did not know a bear from a plain wrapper found themselves humming about a mighty convoy, rolling through the night and wanting somehow to be part of it. The song took the private world of the highway and set it out on the front porch of the whole nation, and the nation fell for it hard. And they did not just sing along, they went out and bought in. The stores could hardly keep the units on the shelves. Whole families crowded into the electronics shop on a Saturday to pick one out, and drove home with it on the seat like a new pet, already arguing over handles. People who had never in their lives spoken to a stranger without an introduction suddenly could not wait to key up and send their voices into the dark. The truckers watched their quiet working channel fill up overnight with dentists and housewives and teenagers and grandmothers, all of them fumbling with the slang, all of them thrilled to be there. The old hands had mixed feelings about it, and you could hardly blame them. Their channel, the one they had built and lived on and needed for their work, got loud and crowded near to bursting. Folks who didn't know the etiquette talked over each other and hogged the air and got the words comically wrong. Some of the truckers grumbled that the magic was being trampled by the crowd, that a working tool had turned into a toy. And there was truth in it. Something did change when everybody came pouring in. The channel was never quite so peaceful again. But something wonderful happened too, something worth setting beside the grumbling. For a few bright years there, the whole country was talking to itself, really talking, across every line that usually kept people apart. The banker and the farmhand and the shy teenager and the lonely widow were all just voices on the same channel, and nobody could see the differences that would have mattered anywhere else. A craze born on the highway had spread into every neighbourhood in the land, and folks who might never otherwise have exchanged a word were suddenly good buddies on Channel 19, laughing together in the dark. It swept through the culture like a summer storm. The slang turned up in the advertisements and the comic strips and the cartoons the children watched on Saturday mornings. The trucker became a kind of hero, the last free cowboy of the open road, and everybody wanted a little of that freedom for themselves. For a season or two, the CB was simply the biggest thing going, the thing everybody was doing, the warm, crackling craze that had caught the whole country at once. We know a bit about crazes like that now, the way a thing can catch fire and race through everyone all at the same moment. We watch them flare up and burn out on our screens all the time, faster than ever, here today and forgotten by the weekend. But those spread in silence, don't they? Each of us alone with our glass. The convoy craze spread in voices. It put people in the same crowded air together, fumbling and laughing and learning the words, reaching out to strangers for the pure joy of reaching. It was loud and it was messy, and the old-timers were half right to miss the quiet. But oh, for a few shining years the whole country wanted in, and picked up a microphone and said hello into the dark together, and there has not been anything quite so warm or quite so wide since. Now step inside the house, because the CB did not stay in the truck for long. All over America, people set up base stations right there at home, a bigger unit parked on a desk or a kitchen counter, plugged into a tall antenna out back. You could sit in your own living room in your slippers and reach out to the whole neighbourhood and beyond. Husbands checked in with wives from the road. Neighbours chatted across town without ever picking up a telephone. Shut-ins and night owls and lonely folks found a whole community waiting on the dial whenever they wanted it. That glowing box on the corner desk became a window onto the wider world, and through it drifted voices from miles away, warm and near and always awake. It was a lifeline before we had a word for such a thing. The base station had a permanence to it that the truck unit never did. This one had a proper home. It sat on a desk in the den, or on the kitchen counter near the coffee pot, or in a corner of the bedroom for the folks who like to talk late into the night. It got its own little spot, its own microphone stand, maybe a notepad beside it for jotting down handles and channels. It became a fixture of the household, as much a part of the room as the television or the good chair by the window, and the whole family gathered near it the way families had always gathered near a warm and useful thing. The evenings were the heart of it. Supper cleared away, dishes done, the day winding down, and someone would drift over and switch it on and settle in for a while. The regulars came on about the same time each night, familiar voices you looked forward to, and you would key up and say your hellos and catch up on the small news of the day. Who had been under the weather? Whose boy had come home? What the weather was fixing to do? It was a front porch you could sit on without leaving your chair, a way of visiting the neighbours that asked nothing but that you show up on the channel and be pleasant. For some folks, it was far more than a pleasant evening. For the ones who could not get out easy, the shut-ins and the elderly and the ailing, that glowing box was a rope thrown across the loneliness. A widow who lived alone, who might go days without a soul knocking at her door, could switch on her base station and be among friends in a moment. Her voice as welcome on the channel as anyone's, her wit and her kindness known and loved for miles around. The world had grown small and quiet around her, and the CB flung it wide open again and gave her back a place in it. And it kept the far-off near. A trucker 1,000 miles from home could sometimes, on a good night with the airwaves bouncing right, reach clear back to the base station in his own kitchen and hear his wife's voice come through the static telling him the children were fine and the porch light was on and she would leave supper warm. Just a few words, just to know. In an age when a long-distance telephone call cost dear and a letter took a week, that little miracle of a voice reaching across half the country for free was a thing to marvel at, and folks did marvel at it, every time. The neighbourhood knitted itself together over those base stations in ways that ran deeper than idle chatter. Word of trouble travelled fast on the channel. A fire, a storm coming, a car in the ditch, a family in need, and the voices would rally, spreading the news, sending help, checking on the folks who lived alone. It was a watch kept over the whole community, informal and unpaid and utterly reliable, neighbours looking after neighbours through a box on the desk. You knew, tuning in each night, that you were part of something that would notice if you went quiet, that would come looking if you did not answer. We have our glowing boxes now too, of course, more of them than we know what to do with, humming on every desk and counter and nightstand in the house. They can reach anyone, anywhere, in an instant. But they pull us apart as often as they draw us together, each of us alone in our own little glow, connected to everyone and near to no one. The old base station worked the other way. It reached out into the near dark, to the folks a few streets over and a few miles down the road, the ones close enough to actually help, and it made a real neighbourhood out of them. So it sat there in the corner of the living room, that faithful box, glowing soft in the evening, ready whenever you were. You could switch it on and never be alone again, could fill the quiet house with friendly voices, could reach out and be reached, night or day. For the lonely it was a lifeline. For the family it was a front porch. For the trucker far from home it was a voice across the dark that said the light was still on. It asked so little and gave so much, that faithful box in the corner, and the folks who sat by it of an evening never forgot the warmth that came pouring out of it, from miles and miles away, right into the heart of the home. Look up now, up above the rooftops and the truck cabs to the antennas. This was the part everyone could see. The tall silver whip bolted to the back bumper that whistled in the wind, or the towering mast rising off the roof of the house, guyed with wires and pointed at the sky. The taller the antenna, the farther your voice could travel, and so it became a quiet point of pride, a way of announcing to the whole block that a talker lived here. Neighbours compared them the way they compared their gardens. There was real craft in getting one just right, in tuning it and trimming it until your signal carried clean and far. And on a windy night you could hear them singing faintly out there in the dark, all those slender antennas reaching up hoping to catch a voice. They came in every shape and size, those antennas, and each one told you something about the person who put it up. The truck driver had his whip mounted tall and proud on the back of the cab, a long flexible rod that bowed back in the wind and sprang up straight again, sometimes with a little flag or a curl of coloured tape near the top so he could spot his own rig in a crowded lot. The base station folks went bigger still, up on the roof, a tall mast with a proper antenna at the crown of it, held steady by guy wires running down to the eaves, reaching as high as they dared to reach. Putting one up was a whole undertaking, and half the pleasure of the hobby lived right there. You climbed up on the roof on a fair Saturday with your tools and your helper down below, and you wrestled the mast into place and ran the wires and worried over every foot of height, because every foot brought you a little more reach. Then came the tuning, the fussy, patient, satisfying work of trimming it just so, adjusting and testing and adjusting again until the meter read right and your signal went out clean and strong. A fellow could lose a whole weekend to it happily and count it time well spent. And it became a quiet matter of pride, that antenna standing tall against the sky. It told the whole neighbourhood that a talker lived in that house, someone serious about the hobby, someone who could reach out farther than most. Men compared them over the back fence the way they compared their tomatoes and their lawns, admiring a well-set mast, trading advice on how to get another mile or two of range. There was no bragging in it exactly, just the honest pride of a thing done well and standing where all could see it. The children looked up at them and wondered. To a boy in the yard, that tall silver mast on the roof was a thing of pure mystery and power, a finger pointing up at the whole wide sky, pulling voices down out of the air from towns he'd never seen. He knew that somewhere up in that thin metal his father's voice went flying out to strangers 100 miles off, and that other voices came sailing back down the same slender path, and it seemed to him a kind of magic, and in a way it was. They had a voice of their own too, those antennas, though you had to listen close to hear it. On a windy night, lying in bed with the house dark and quiet, you could catch the faint high singing of the wind through the guy wires, a thin and lonesome music drifting down from the roof. It was the sound of the antenna doing its patient work up there in the dark, reaching, always reaching, straining up toward all the other antennas reaching back across the miles, the whole country bristling with them, everyone hoping to catch a voice. We do not see them much anymore, and that is a small quiet loss you might not have thought to mourn. Our signals travel invisible now, no mast required, everything hidden away inside the little glass and the towers we hardly notice. The old antennas were honest about themselves. They stood right out in the open for all to see, plain proof that the folks below wanted to reach out, wanted to be heard, wanted to send their voices up and out into the wide world. There was something touching in that visibility, in a whole nation of people planting these tall silver reaches on their rooftops, all of them straining toward one another through the open air. So look up at them one more time, all those slender masts against the evening sky, whistling faintly in the wind, pointing up and out toward everyone else. They were the humblest kind of monument, and the most hopeful. Every one of them stood for a person down below who did not want to be alone, who had climbed up on the roof of a fair Saturday and raised a piece of metal toward the heavens for no other reason than to reach out and touch a stranger's voice. And on a windy night, when they all sang together out there in the dark, it was the sound of a whole country quietly reaching for one another, higher and higher, hoping to be heard. It is midnight now, and up ahead the dark cracks open into light. The truck stop rises out of the night like a lit island, its tall sign glowing, its lot full of idling rigs breathing steam into the cold air. You pull in, and the smell hits you first. Diesel and hot asphalt and coffee and bacon on the griddle. Inside it is warm and loud and alive at an hour when the rest of the world is fast asleep, and here is where all those voices from the CB finally got faces. The handles you'd been talking to for 100 miles turned out to be real people in a booth by the window, and you slid in beside them like old friends. Coffee got refilled without asking. The pie was always good. It was a gathering place for a nation of night travellers, and nobody there was ever a stranger for long. You saw it long before you reached it, that glow on the horizon, a warm smudge of light in all that dark that meant coffee and company, and a place to rest your eyes. It grew as you came on, the tall sign resolving out of the night, and something in you eased at the sight of it, the way a sailor must ease at the sight of harbour. After long hours alone on the black road, that island of light was a promise kept, and you felt your shoulders come down a little as you signalled and swung in off the highway. The lot itself was a world. Rows of great rigs parked nose to tail, their engines murmuring low, breathing plumes of steam and exhaust into the cold, their running lights glowing like a little city bedded down for the night. Drivers move between them, stretching, stamping the stiffness out of their legs, calling out to one another in the dark. And over it all hung that smell you never forgot. Diesel and cold air and hot grease and coffee. The smell of the road itself. The smell that meant you had made it to somewhere warm. Inside was the real marvel, warm and bright and busy, humming with life at an hour when every ordinary house for miles around had long gone dark. The counter lined with tired men hunched over their plates, the booths full of talk, the waitress moving down the row with the coffee pot, calling half the drivers by name, filling the cups before they were half empty. The griddle hissing, the plates clattering, the low, steady murmur of 100 conversations. It was an oasis, plain and simple, a place that stayed awake and warm and welcoming when all the rest of the world had shut its doors. And here was where the magic of the CB came full circle, where the voices got their faces at last. All those handles you'd been riding with, trading warnings and jokes and small talk for 100 miles of dark, turned out to be flesh and blood right there in the booths. You would come in, and someone would call out your handle across the room, and you would look, and there was the fellow you'd been talking to all night, grinning at you, waving you over. And you slid in across from a man you'd never once laid eyes on, and felt somehow that you already knew him, because you did. You knew his voice, his humour, the load on his mind. The face was just the last piece. There was a fellowship in those late-night rooms that you did not find in daylight places. Everyone there was in the same boat, awake when they should be sleeping, far from home, carrying the same weariness in the same bones. That shared lot made brothers of strangers. Folks traded road news and told their stories and passed the sugar and looked out for one another, and nobody ate alone unless they wanted to. A newcomer got waved into a booth. A driver low on funds got his coffee covered quiet, no fuss made. It was decency, plain highway decency, served up hot alongside the eggs. We have our all-night places still, lit up bright along every off-ramp, and you can buy your coffee and your fuel at any hour. But they are quieter now, in the way that matters. Folks come in staring at their phones and leave the same way, and the waitress does not know your name, and the booths are full of people alone together. The old truck stop was loud with real talk, thick with real fellowship, a place where the voices from the radio became friends across a table. It fed more than the body. It fed the plain human need to be among your own kind for a while. So you sat there in the warm, bright middle of the night, coffee steaming in front of you, pie on the way, a friend across the booth whose face you'd only just learned. Outside, the great rigs breathed in the cold, and the dark road waited. But in here it was warm, and someone knew your name, and the coffee kept coming, and for an hour the loneliness of the long haul fell clean away. Then you would settle up and shake a hand, and step back out into the night with a hot cup for the road, and a good buddy's voice soon to be crackling in your cab again. Bright as an island, that place, in an ocean of dark. And every night traveller in the country knew the blessing of it. Let's set the record straight, because this was never just a man's world. Women were all over the CB, and they gave it some of its warmest colour. Some rode along with their husbands and worked the mic as a team, calling out the bears while he drove. Some ran their own base stations at home and became the beloved voice that half the county tuned in to hear. There was slang for all of it, and a woman on the air often drew a friendly crowd of voices just glad she was there. For a lot of women, the CB was a door swinging open, a way to reach a whole world of conversation without ever leaving the kitchen or the passenger seat. Their laughter and their quick wit and their steady kindness threaded through the whole thing, and the airwaves were far richer for it. Picture the wife riding shotgun on the long haul, sharing the driving and the watching, working that microphone like a partner in the whole enterprise. While her husband kept his hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road, she kept her ears on the channel, calling out the bears and the road news, chatting with the voices up ahead, keeping them both company and keeping them both safe. Some of those teams were known up and down the highways, the two of them together a familiar warmth on the channel, and a lonesome driver was always glad to hear a wife's voice come on, bright and easy, breaking up the long dark miles. At home it was much the same. All across the country, women ran their own base stations from the kitchen or the den and became fixtures of the local channel every bit as beloved as any trucker. She would switch on in the afternoon with the ironing to do or supper on the stove and hold court over the neighbourhood airwaves, and half the county tuned in just to hear her. She knew everybody's news. She checked on the folks who lived alone. She was the warm, steady heart of the local channel, and the men who talked to her treated her voice like a bit of sunshine in their day. For a great many women, that little box was a door swung suddenly open. Think of the ones whose whole world had shrunk down to the house and the yard, the ones raising children in some quiet place with the nearest neighbour a good ways off, and the husband gone all day. It could be a lonesome life, that, hours on end with no grown voice to answer your own. And then here came the CB, and with one turn of the dial, the whole wide world came pouring into the kitchen, 100 friendly voices, a whole community to be part of, all without ever setting down the dish towel or leaving the little ones napping in the next room. They brought something to the airwaves the men could not, a particular warmth and quickness and grace. A woman with a sharp wit could hold a channel spellbound, trading jokes with the truckers, giving as good as she got, laughing that laugh that came crackling through the static and made everybody within range smile in their cabs. She could gentle a rattled driver, or cheer a low one, or keep a lonely soul company through the small hours with a kindness that felt almost like family. The channels were softer and brighter and more human for having them on, and everybody knew it. There was a real freedom in it for them too, the same freedom the handle gave everyone, but sweeter somehow. On the air, A woman was judged by nothing but her voice, and her words and her kindness, not by her looks or her age or whatever narrow place the world had tried to fit her into. She could be quick and funny and fully herself, could reach out to strangers and be welcomed on her own terms, could have a whole rich life of conversation and friendship that was hers alone, entirely apart from wife and mother and all the other names she answered to all day. The channel gave her back her own voice, and let her send it out as far as it would carry. We forget them too easily, looking back, when we picture the CB as a world of gruff men and diesel and the open road. But the women were there the whole time, threading their warmth all through it, riding shotgun and running the base stations and lighting up the local channels, giving the whole crackling country of voices its heart. And the airwaves knew it. A woman's voice coming on, bright and warm in the middle of a long grey afternoon or a long dark night, could turn a whole channel gentle, could make a dozen tired strangers glad all at once. She was welcome wherever she keyed up, and beloved on more channels than she ever knew, and the story of the CB is only half told without her in it. Now to the channel nobody joked about. Down at Channel 9, the tone changed entirely, because that one was kept clear for emergencies alone. Volunteers all across the country, folks who belonged to teams that monitored it around the clock, sat and listened on Channel 9 for anyone in trouble. A stranded driver on a lonely shoulder, a car in the ditch on an icy night, an accident with no phone for miles. You keyed up on 9, and a calm voice answered and sent help your way, help that might have taken hours to find otherwise. In an age before the little phone in every pocket, that channel saved real lives. Quietly, again and again, with no reward but the knowing. It was neighbours looking out for neighbours on the largest scale imaginable, and it was the CB at its very finest. There was an unspoken law about Channel 9 that near everybody honoured. You did not chatter there. You did not run your idle talk or your jokes or your road news across it. It was kept clear, always, held open and quiet and ready, so that when someone reached for it in real trouble, their cry would not be lost in a crowd. That kind of restraint from a wild, free, crowded thing like the CB tells you something about the folks who used it. They understood that some things were sacred, and they guarded that channel like it was. And there were people listening. That was the wonder of it. All across the country, in 10,000 kitchens and dens and parked patrol cars, volunteers kept a watch on Channel 9 around the clock, in shifts, for no pay and no glory. They belonged to teams that took the duty seriously as any job, sitting up through the small hours with an ear on that quiet channel, waiting for the call that might come or might not, ready either way. They gave their evenings and their sleep to it, these ordinary folks, for nothing but the knowing that if somebody out there needed help, somebody would be listening. Picture the night it mattered. A driver run off the road in the dark, out where the houses are few and the miles between them long. The car nose down in the ditch. The cold coming in. Not a light to be seen, and not a phone for miles. In another age, that soul might have waited till dawn, or worse. But this driver had a CB, and reached for Channel 9 with a shaking hand, and keyed up into the dark, and a calm voice answered right back. "Where are you?" the voice said, easy and sure. "Tell me what you see." And already, somewhere, that volunteer was on the telephone rousing help, and it was coming, and the driver was not alone in the dark anymore. That was the gift of it, as much as the help itself. The being answered, the knowing, in that first cold moment of trouble, that a steady voice was there and had heard you and was already doing something. it gentled the panic. It turned an emergency from a lonely terror into a thing being handled by calm and capable hands. And those volunteers were good at that part too, at keeping a frightened person company on the channel while the help made its way out, talking low and steady, saying it is all right now, they are coming, stay with me, until the flashing lights at last came over the rise. Nobody did it for thanks. That was the plain heart of the thing. The volunteers never met most of the folks they helped, never heard the whole end of the story, never got so much as a handshake for the nights they gave up and the lives they quietly saved. They did it because it needed doing, because someone ought to be listening, because that was simply the decent thing and they were decent people. It was neighbourliness on the grandest scale imaginable, a whole country of strangers keeping watch over one another through the dark, asking nothing back. We have the little phone in every pocket now, and it is a genuine blessing, and it has surely saved more souls than the old channel ever could. Press 3 numbers anywhere, and help is on the way. But something quiet went out of the world when the watch on Channel 9 came down, some sense of your actual neighbours keeping vigil, real folks a few miles off who had chosen to sit up and listen for you in the night. The help comes from a system now, faceless and sure. Back then it came from a person, a volunteer at a kitchen table, who had given up their sleep on the chance that you might need them. So of all the crowded, laughing, crackling world of the CB, remember Channel 9, the quiet one, the one nobody joked about. It was the proof of what all the rest of it was really made of underneath the slang and the games. When the chips were down, when a stranger was in real trouble in the real dark, the whole thing turned out to be built on something solid and good, a plain willingness to look out for one another that ran bone deep. Help that might have been hours away came in minutes because someone was listening. That was the CB at its very finest, and it is worth honouring still. It is summer now, and the whole family is loading into the car for the long drive to see the relatives. And there, riding proudly on the dashboard, is the family CB. The kids fought over who got to hold the microphone. Dad worked the dial and called out to the passing trucks, and the truckers always answered a family kindly, pointing out the clean rest stops and the good places to eat and how much longer to the state line. The long boring miles that used to crawl by now had a soundtrack of friendly strangers, and the children pressed their faces to the glass hoping the voice they just heard belonged to that big rig rolling past. It made the country feel smaller and warmer, that little box, and it turned a tedious drive into an adventure the kids would talk about for years. You know the morning it started, the whole ritual of it. Up before dawn, the car packed to the roof the night before, the cooler wedged in behind the seat and the suitcases roped down and everybody herded out into the grey early light still rubbing the sleep from their eyes. And then the moment the engine turned over, and the CB lit up with its soft glow and its wash of static, and the trip was truly, officially begun. The kids climbed over each other for the good seats. Somebody had to hold the mic first, and there was a squabble about that, and it got settled more or less, and off you all went into the sunrise. That microphone was the most contested prize in the car. To a child, holding it was everything. The weight of it in your small hands, the little button under your thumb, the impossible thrill of pressing down and sending your own voice out into the world where a real live trucker might hear it. They took turns by the mile marker, by the state line, by whatever piece their mother could broker, and when at last it was your turn and you keyed up and squeaked out a shy little hello, and a great gravelly voice came booming back all warm and kind, calling you good buddy. Why, you lit up like the 4th of July. The truckers were wonderful with the families, every one of them, and it is a thing worth remembering about that world. A big rough driver who had been alone on the road for days would hear those little voices come on the channel and go gentle as a grandfather. He would point out the rest stop up ahead with the clean bathrooms and the good shade. He would tell them where to get the best burger for miles and how much farther to the state line and whether the traffic was clear on up the road. He would answer the children's silly questions with all the patience in the world and send the whole family on with a kindness that made the parents' day near as much as the kids'. And oh, what it did to those long, dull miles. Any grown soul who travelled as a child remembers the endless ache of the back seat, the are we there yet crawl of the hours, the whole country reduced to the same fence posts sliding past forever. But with the CB going, the miles filled up with life. There were voices now, friendly strangers up and down the road, warnings and jokes and the running story of the highway itself. The children hung on every word and pressed their faces to the glass when a big rig thundered past, sure, just sure, that the kindly voice they had just heard belonged to that very truck, and waving like mad at the driver way up in his cab. It knit the family closer too, in its way. All of them tuned to the same little box, sharing the same voices in on the same adventure together. There was no drifting off alone into your own private world back then, no separate screen for every child. You were all in it as one, listening together, laughing together at the funny handles and the trucker jokes, all of you leaning in when a warning came down the line. The drive itself became the thing you shared, not just the getting there. And some of the best talk a family ever had happened in that rolling car with the CB crackling on the dash. We travel so silent now, don't we? The children in the back each sealed off in their own little glowing world, headphones on, the miles passing unseen and unremarked. It gets them there quiet, and there is something to be said for quiet. But something is lost too. That old shared adventure of the road, that sense of the whole family moving through a living country together, reaching out to it and being answered. The CB made the trip itself an event, made strangers into friends for a few miles, made the vast country feel small and warm and full of kindly folks all rooting you along toward Grandma's house. So there it rode, proud on the dashboard, the family CB, glowing and crackling through the long summer miles. It turned the dreaded drive into the best part of the trip. It gave the children a story they would tell for the rest of their lives, about the summer they talked to real truckers all the way across the state, about the voices in the dark and the big rigs rolling past and waving up at the drivers way up high. Small and humble, that box, but it made the whole country feel like one big neighborhood a family could roll right through, welcomed at every mile, and the kids never did forget it. Let's stay with the children a moment, because a whole generation grew up with the CB crackling in the background of their lives. To a kid, that radio was pure magic, a doorway to grown-up mysteries and faraway places. They memorized the slang faster than anyone. They begged for a turn on the mic and giggled when a trucker gave them a handle of their own. Some kids stayed up past bedtime with an ear pressed to a base station, listening to the night voices roll in from towns they had never seen, dreaming about the great wide country out there beyond the yard. For them, the CB was not a fad at all. It was simply the sound of the world being bigger and friendlier than it had any right to be, and many of them carried that wonder with them the whole rest of their lives. There is a particular kind of magic a thing has when you are small, before you understand how it works, when it is all mystery and wonder. And the CB had that in spades for a child. It was a box that voices came out of, voices of grown-up strangers from far-off places, talking in a secret language full of bears and hammers and handles, and a boy or girl could sit near it for hours just soaking it in, half understanding, wholly enchanted. It was the grown-up world made audible, the great, wide, mysterious country pouring right into the living room, and it was theirs to listen to whenever the set was on. They learned the slang faster than anybody, the way children always do with the languages of the world. The grown-ups fumbled and studied and got it wrong, but the kids just soaked it up, effortless, and were soon rattling off 10 fours and what is your 20s like they'd been born to it. They worked it into their play, tore around the yard on their bicycles running convoys, called out bears and rolled right past imaginary roadblocks, keyed up invisible microphones and answered themselves in their best gravelly trucker voices. The language of the highway became the language of the playground, and no one taught it to them at all. And oh, the day a trucker gave a child a handle of their very own. There was no gift like it. To key up shy and small and hear a great kind voice boom back, "Well now, we will call you Little Britches, or Short Stuff, or Peanut." Why, that child walked on air for a week. To have a real trucker, a genuine grown-up hero of the open road, hand you a name and welcome you onto the channel that was to be knighted. They practiced saying it. They introduced themselves with it. They treasured it the way another child might treasure a medal, because that is just what it was. Some of them, the dreamers, the night owls, took it further still. They would slip out of bed long after they were meant to be sleeping and creep to where the base station glowed and settle down close with an ear right up against it and listen to the night come alive. The voices rolled in from towns they had never seen and could barely imagine. Truckers hauling through the dark 1,000 miles off, telling of highways and cities and country that stretched on forever past the edge of the small world they knew. And a child would lie there in the dark, wide-eyed, drinking it in, feeling the whole vast country breathing just beyond the yard, dreaming of the day they would go out and see it. That was the real gift the CB gave the children, bigger than the slang or the handles or the play. It gave them a country. It taught them, before they were old enough to even know they were learning it, that the world was wide and full of people, that strangers 1,000 miles off were mostly kind, that beyond the fence and the yard and the little town lay a whole humming continent of folks looking out for one another. It made the world feel big and friendly at once, and a child who grew up believing that carried something precious forward into their whole life. Our children grow up with glowing boxes too, more of them and brighter than ever, and those boxes can show them the entire world, every corner of it, in an instant. But it comes to them flat and silent and endless, a world through glass, a world that does not know they are watching. The CB gave a child a world made of voices, warm and near and human, voices that would answer back if you were brave enough to key up, voices that gave you a name and called you good buddy and made you feel part of it all. That is a different kind of growing up, and a gentler one, and the ones who had it were lucky. So they grew up on the dial, that generation, with the static and the slang and the night voices threaded all through their childhoods, and they carried it forward, all of them, in one way or another. Some grew up to be truckers themselves, chasing the very romance they'd heard about under the covers past bedtime. Most just carried the wonder of it, the memory of a world that had felt so big and so friendly heard through a glowing box. And to this day, a certain kind of grown soul will hear a burst of static and a far-off voice and feel something stir, remembering the child they were, lying in the dark, listening to the whole wide country roll by and finding it kind. Now for one of the sweetest traditions of them all. Sooner or later, all these disembodied voices wanted to meet face to face, and when they did, they called it an eyeball. Whole clubs sprang up in every town, and they held gatherings in parking lots and picnic groves and rented halls, coffee breaks and jamborees where hundreds of people came to finally see the faces behind the handles they had loved for years. It was a marvellous, funny thing, matching a voice to a person at last, discovering that Silver Fox was a grandmother and Big Bad John was shy and soft-spoken in person. Real friendships were made there, and more than a few marriages. People drove for hours just to shake a hand they had only ever heard. The whole country, it seemed, was hungry to belong to something, and here it was. It was bound to happen when you think about it. You could only talk to a voice for so long, come to know it so well, share so many miles and so much small news, before you started to wonder about the face. What did they look like? This good buddy you talked to every evening, this voice that had kept you company through 100 dark nights. And so, the idea took hold all across the country, the eyeball, the meeting in person at last, and it became one of the dearest rituals the whole hobby ever knew. The clubs sprang up everywhere to make it happen. Nearly every town had one, with a name and officers and regular doings, and they organised the gatherings that everyone looked forward to for weeks. A coffee break some Saturday morning at a diner, a picnic in the summer out at the Grove, a big jamboree in a rented hall come the cold weather, with hundreds pouring in from miles around. Folks put on their good clothes and drove for hours, some of them, just for the chance to finally lay eyes on the voices they had come to love and to shake the hands attached to them. And oh, the delight and the surprise of it, matching the voice to the face at last. You had built a whole picture in your mind over all those miles of talk, and hardly ever was it right. The booming voice you took for a big rough giant of a man turned out to belong to a wisp of a fellow, quiet and shy as could be away from his microphone. Silver Fox, that smooth, easy voice you'd pictured as some dashing rogue, turned out to be a white-haired grandmother with a twinkle in her eye. Everybody looked wrong, gloriously wrong, and it was the best joke in the world. The whole room laughing at how little a voice tells you about a face. But under the laughing, something real was happening in those halls. Friendships that had lived only in the air, only in voices trading talk across the dark, stepped out into the light and became flesh and blood and lasting. Folks who had known each other for a year on the channel embraced like the old friends they truly were. And more than a few times, a fellow and a lady who had been talking sweet on some quiet channel for months finally met across a crowded jamboree floor, and one thing led to another, and there were marriages that started as voices in the night. It happened more than you would think. There was a hunger underneath it all, and the eyeball fed it. A hunger to belong, to be part of something, to gather with your own kind and be known. Folks are made for company, for the warmth of a crowd of friends, and the CB had given them friends but kept them a little apart. Voices without bodies, near and far at once. The eyeball closed that gap. It let people finally stand shoulder to shoulder with the community they had built in the air, hug the necks of the strangers they loved, be together in one warm room at last. And you could feel how much it meant, the joy that filled those halls, the plain human gladness of belonging. We do a version of it now, I suppose, all our online friends finally meeting up in the flesh, and there is the same sweet strangeness in it, the same matching of a face to a self you thought you knew. But there is something the old eyeball had that ours has lost, and it is this. Those folks lived close enough to actually gather. The community you built on the CB was a local one, or near to it, your own county and the counties round about, close enough to drive to of a Saturday. And so the friendships could become real, ongoing, woven into your actual days. The voices in the air became neighbours you saw and knew, so they gathered all across the country in the parking lots and the picnic groves and the rented halls, hundreds strong, hungry to belong and finding that they did. They matched the voices to the faces and laughed at how wrong they'd all been. They made friendships that lasted lifetimes and marriages that raised children. They drove for hours just to shake a hand they'd only heard, and they went home after full to the brim, having learned the sweetest lesson the whole Craze had to teach, that behind every voice in the dark was a real and living person, and that when you finally brought them all together in one warm room, what you had was not a network at all. It was a family. Sit with something gentle now, something at the very heart of it. Most of the people you talked to on the CB, you never saw at all. You knew a voice and nothing more, and yet you came to know them, their moods, their humour, the little catch in their words when they were tired. You could ride beside someone for 200 miles, trade your whole life story, and then peel off at your exit and never once lay eyes on them. And somehow that made the talking easier, freer, more honest. People said things to those unseen strangers they might never say to the folks across their own kitchen table. There was a purity in it, a connection made of voice alone, and it is a strange and tender thing to have known someone so well and never once seen their face. Think of how much a voice carries. Once you learn to really hear it, you could not see a soul out there, and yet you knew so much. You knew when a fellow was bone-tired by the drag in his words. You knew when he was in good spirits by the lift in them. You caught the little catch that meant something was weighing on him, the warmth that meant he had taken a shine to you, the dry note that meant he was pulling your leg. A voice tells you nearly everything a face does, if you're listening close, and out there on the channel, listening close was all you ever did. You could come to know a person deeply that way, more deeply sometimes than the folks you saw every day. 200 miles is a long time to talk, and folks talked about everything on those long hauls, the whole of their lives spilling out into the dark, the work and the worries, the children, grown and gone or still underfoot, the wife back home, or the wife that was no longer there, the dreams they had once had and the ones they still held on to. You would ride beside a voice for half a night and know its whole story by the end, and it would know yours. Two strangers grown close as kin over the crackle of the airwaves. And then your exit came, and that was that. You said your so long and your safe travels, and you swung off onto your road and they held to theirs, and you never saw them, never would, never even knew their proper name. A whole friendship, deep and real, lived and completed in a single night and gone by morning. It ought to feel sad, and maybe a little of it was, but mostly it felt like a gift, complete in itself, a warmth that asked nothing and left nothing behind but the good of having had it. Here is the strange truth of it, the thing that sits so tender at the heart of the whole business. The not seeing made it easier. When a body cannot see your face, cannot judge your clothes or your car or the lines around your eyes, cannot place you or size you up or hold your history against you, something loosens. You can be honest, you can be soft, you can say the true thing sitting heavy on your heart, the thing you would swallow back in the hard bright light of a face-to-face. Folks told those unseen strangers what they could not tell their own kin across the kitchen table, and were told the same in return, and it healed something in them, that free and faceless honesty. There was a purity to it you do not often find, a meeting of two people stripped down to nothing but their voices and their words and their kindness. No looks to distract, no status to reckon with, no first impression built on anything but the way you treated one another. Just soul to soul across the dark, two voices reaching out and finding each other and building something real out of pure attention and pure goodwill. It was connection at its most essential, love thy neighbour in its plainest form, offered to a neighbour whose face you would never know. We are drowning in faces now, more than we could ever have imagined back then. Everyone we speak to comes with a picture, a whole gallery of them, a face for every name and a name for every face. And still, somehow, we know each other less. We judge so quick on what we see. We build our impressions on looks and likes and the endless scroll of images before a single word is even said. There was a wisdom in the old faceless way we have quite forgotten, a way of knowing a person by their voice and their heart alone, unclouded by anything the eye can catch. So sit a moment longer with those faces you never saw and somehow knew, the good buddies of a single night, the voices that kept you company and spilled their whole hearts to you and vanished by dawn, never to be seen. It is a strange and tender thing to carry, the memory of someone you knew so well and never once laid eyes on, someone whose troubles you helped carry and whose voice you would know anywhere, and whose face is a perfect blank to you still. But that was the deep, quiet magic of the whole thing. It taught a country full of people that you can truly know a soul with nothing but a voice in the dark, and that sometimes the not seeing is what lets you see clear. Let's step into the glow of the picture show, because the craze got so big it lit up the silver screen. Hollywood could not resist it. There were movies full of truckers and fast cars and CB slang, of grinning heroes outrunning the bears with a convoy at their back, and the whole country lined up to watch. Suddenly the handle and the 10 code were everywhere, on lunchboxes and t-shirts and toys, on the radio and the television and the breakfast cereal. The trucker became a kind of folk hero, the last free cowboy of the open road. It was a long way from that first little box under the dashboard, and some of the old-timers grumbled that the magic had gotten too loud and too commercial. But there was no denying it. For one bright moment, the CB was the most American thing in America. You remember lining up for those pictures, the whole family piling into the theatre on a Saturday night, the smell of the popcorn and the hush as the lights went down. And up on that great bright screen came the world you'd been living in on the dashboard, the highways and the big rigs and the fast cars, the slang you spoke every day now spoken by movie stars 10 feet tall. There was a thrill in that, seeing your own crackling little world blown up huge and grand and put right at the heart of the show. The trucker up there was a hero, and you knew truckers, talked to them every night, and it made you feel part of something the whole country had fallen for. And Hollywood laid it on thick, all the romance of the road. The grinning hero at the wheel of his rig, quick with a joke and quicker on the highway, a whole convoy of good buddies at his back outrunning the bears and thumbing his nose at every roadblock. It was the open road as a grand adventure, freedom on 18 wheels, and the country ate it up. The theatres filled and filled again. Everybody wanted to see it, wanted a taste of that easy highway freedom, wanted to ride along with the last free cowboys blazing across the land. Then came the flood of it, the way it always goes when something catches the whole country at once. The slang and the trucker and the whole CB world spilled off the screen and into everything you could buy. There were lunch boxes with grinning truckers on them, and t-shirts and toy rigs for the children, and models to build. It was on the television now, in the shows and the advertisements. It was on the breakfast cereal. The handle and the 10 code, born free on the highway, turned up on every shelf in every store, printed and packaged and sold. The trucker himself became a genuine folk hero in all this, and it is worth pausing on, because it says something about what the country was hungry for. Here was the last free cowboy, folks decided, the one man left who still roamed the open country as he pleased, beholden to no boss he could see, riding his great machine across the whole wide land with the wind in his face, and a good buddy always near. In a time when so many felt hemmed in and tied down, that image of highway freedom struck deep. The trucker stood for something people ached to have, and they loved him for it. The old-timers, though, they had their doubts, and there was justice in them. The folks who had built the thing back when it was small and quiet, who had used it for real work and real need, watched it get loud and commercial and gaudy, and some of them grieved. The magic, they said, was getting trampled by the crowd and the cash. The channel that had been theirs was a circus now, and they were not wrong exactly. Something did get lost when a working tool and a real community became the season's hottest craze, packaged up and sold on lunchboxes. The quiet purity of the early days did not survive the fame. We know this story cold now, in our own time. We have watched 100 small real things get discovered and blown up and sold back to us. Watched the authentic become the commercial near overnight. Watched crazes flare across the whole country brighter and faster than ever. There is always that ache when it happens, the old-timers grumbling that it was better before the crowd came, and there is always some truth in the grumbling, and always some sourness too. Because the crowd came for a reason. The thing was good, and word got out, and everybody wanted in. That is not really a tragedy. It is just how a fire spreads. So the CB rolled right into the movie theatre, and out onto the lunch boxes and the T-shirts and the cereal boxes, and for one bright loud moment it was a most American thing in all America. The old-timers grumbled and the magic changed, and something of the early quiet was surely lost for good. But something was gained too, harder to name. For a season the whole country dreamed the same dream, of the open road and the last free cowboy and the good buddy always near, and lined up together in the dark of the picture show to watch it flicker by. It was a long way from that first small box under the dashboard, but it all came from there, every bit of it, from folks just wanting to reach out and say hello into the dark. Now listen to how people talked back then, even the ones who never touched a radio. The CB language leaked out of the trucks and into the whole culture until everybody was using it. Folks said 10-4 when they meant yes. They asked what is your 20 when they wanted to know where you were. Kids on bicycles played convoy in the driveway. Grandmothers said good buddy. This slang turned up in advertisements and comic strips and Saturday morning cartoons, and half the people repeating it could not have told you where it came from. That is how you know a thing has truly taken hold of a country, when its private language becomes everyone's language. For a few short years, America spoke fluent CB, and you could hear the highway humming underneath even the most ordinary conversation. It got so you heard it everywhere, in places that had nothing to do with the road at all. A fellow would ask his wife where the children had got to, and she would say she had no idea of their 20. A man would agree to something at the hardware store with a cheerful 10-4. Folks signed off their telephone calls with a catch you on the flip side, and never thought twice about it, and never once considered that the words had been born in a truck cab on a dark highway. The language had come loose from its home and drifted right into the ordinary talk of ordinary days. The children carried it furthest and fastest, the way children always do. They played convoy up and down the driveway on their bicycles, one behind another, calling out bears and roadblocks, keeping the formation tight. They gave each other handles and would answer to nothing else all summer long. They worked the slang into every game they played, so that a whole neighborhood of small ones was rattling off the language of the interstate without ever having ridden a single mile of it. And the grandmothers, bless them, picked it up too. Good buddy this and 10-4 that. And the mixing of that old gentle voice with all that highway slang was a sweet and funny thing to hear. It soaked into everything the country made and sold and watched. The advertisements used it to seem current and friendly, a fellow on the television urging you to put the hammer down on over to the showroom. The comic strips in the Sunday paper had their characters talking it. The cartoons the children watched on Saturday mornings were full of it. Trucker heroes and CB slang and convoys rolling across the screen. It was the flavour of the moment, and everyone who wanted to seem in step with the times reached for it, until the words were so common nobody heard them as special anymore. And that is just the thing. That is the very proof of how deep it ran. When half the people saying a word could not have told you where it came from, when the slang had travelled so far from its birthplace that it just seemed like plain American talk, that is when you know a thing has truly taken a country by the heart. It was no longer the truckers' language, or the hobbyists', or anybody's in particular. It had become everyone's. It had slipped its moorings entirely and floated free into the common speech, the shared tongue of a whole nation for a few short years. You could hear the highway humming under the most ordinary talk if you listened. A whole country had, without quite meaning to, taken the private words of the long dark road and made them the words of the kitchen and the schoolyard and the corner store. The romance of the interstate had gotten into the very speech of people who never left their own town, so that even standing still in your own front yard you were somehow faintly part of that great rolling adventure. The language carried a little of the freedom in it wherever it went. Languages do this still, of course. Every little world spins off its words, and the best of them leak out and spread, and before long everyone is saying things they could not trace to the source if you paid them. It is one of the ways a country stays one country, all of us borrowing each other's words, wearing them smooth with use until they belong to everybody. But there was something especially warm in the CB slang doing it, because of where it came from. It came from folks reaching out to strangers in the dark, from kindness passed down a crowded channel, from good buddies looking out for one another on the open road. And a little of that warmth rode along inside the words wherever they travelled. So for a few short years, America spoke fluent CB, top to bottom, coast to coast, whether it had ever keyed a microphone or not. The slang was in the mouths of children and grandmothers, in the advertisements and the funny papers, in the plain talk of plain days everywhere you went. And under all of it, if you had the ears to hear, ran the faint warm hum of that dark highway where it all began, that whole crackling country of voices reaching out to say hello. The words outlived the craze that made them, lingered on in the common speech long after the antennas came down, and even now an old 10-4 can bring the whole warm world of it flooding back. It is a Saturday afternoon, and you're standing at the counter of the little electronics store with your heart set on a rig of your own. The place smells of solder and warm plastic and new cardboard boxes. Behind the glass sit rows of gleaming units, each one promising more range, more channels, a clearer signal, and you turn them over in your hands trying to choose. The fellow behind the counter is a talker himself, of course, and he tells you which antenna to buy and how to mount it and what the knobs all do. Half the fun was in the choosing and the tinkering, in running the wires and tuning the antenna and getting that first clean signal to carry. You drove home with the box on the seat beside you like a treasure, already dreaming up the name you would go by. The store itself was a wonderland if you had a mind for such things. Shelves crowded with gadgetry, coils of wire and rows of antennas and little drawers full of connectors and parts, the whole place humming faintly with the hobby of it. And that smell, you would know it anywhere. The warm, sharp bite of solder and the clean plastic scent of new units still in their boxes, and the good cardboard smell of a fresh shipment just opened. It was the smell of possibility, of a new thing about to come into your life, and it got into you the moment the door swung shut behind you. And oh, the choosing. Behind the glass counter sat row upon row of gleaming sets, and every one of them seemed to promise something finer than the last. This one had more channels. That one reached farther. This one had a knob for cutting through the noise. That one a meter that told you how strong you were coming through. You leaned over the glass and studied them all, and the clerk would bring one out and set it in your hands, and you would turn it over, feeling the heft of it, imagining it glowing under your own dashboard. It was a hard, happy choice, and you were in no hurry to make it. The fellow behind the counter was the heart of the whole place, and he was a talker himself, naturally, a CB man through and through. He knew every unit on the shelf inside and out, and he was glad to tell you, glad to steer you right. Get the antenna up high, he would say, and mount it here, not there, and this is the knob you want for the noise, and here is how you tune the thing so your signal carries clean. He was not just selling you a box, he was welcoming you into the hobby, passing along what he knew the way the old hands always did, setting you up to do it right. Because the buying was only the beginning, and everybody knew it. Half the joy of the whole thing lived in the tinkering that came after. You took your treasure home, and then the real fun started. Running the wires just so, climbing up to mount the antenna, fussing over the tuning until you got it dialed in right. You could lose a whole weekend to it and count yourself lucky. There was a deep satisfaction in getting that first clean signal to carry far, in hearing a distant voice come back strong, and knowing you had built the thing that reached him with your own two hands. The drive home was the sweetest part, maybe. The box rode on the seat beside you like something precious, and you kept glancing over at it at the stoplights, hardly able to believe it was yours. And your mind was already racing ahead, already dreaming up the name you would go by, trying handles under your breath, picturing that first night you would key up and send your brand new voice out into the dark. You were about to become one of the voices. You had the box right there beside you to prove it, and the whole crackling world was waiting. We buy our gadgets so differently now, and something is lost in it. A tap of the finger and a box appears on the porch 2 days later. No counter, no clerk, no fellow to tell you how it all works and welcome you in. It is faster, surely, and easier, but there is no Saturday afternoon in it. No smell of solder, no leaning over the glass to choose, no talker behind the register passing down his hard-won know-how with a grin. The buying was part of the belonging back then. The store was where the hobby reached out and took you in. So that is where so many of the stories started, right there at the counter of the little electronics store on a Saturday afternoon. Heart set on a rig, the clerk talking your ear off, the gleaming units waiting behind the glass. It was the doorway into the whole warm world of it, the first step of a journey that would carry your voice out across the dark to strangers you would come to love. And a body who lived it never quite forgot that first afternoon, the weight of the box on the seat beside them, the smell of the place still in their clothes, and the name they were already, quietly, beginning to dream up for themselves. So here we are at the end of the road. The antenna's quiet now, the static faded to a gentle hush. We've ridden through a whole day and night of it together, you and I, the little box glowing under the dashboard, the truck stop bright as an island in the dark, the voices reaching out across the miles just to say hello. And now the highway goes quiet, the way it always does at last. Think for a moment about the people who lived this, the trucker keeping his lonesome watch through the small hours, calling out the bears to strangers he would never meet. The wife at the base station, the warm voice half the county tuned in to hear. The volunteer sitting up all night on Channel 9 listening for someone in trouble asking nothing back. They did not think they were living in some remarkable time. They were just reaching out to one another in the dark the way people always have and being kind about it. And maybe that is the small thing worth carrying forward. Not the slang or the machines, but the plain impulse underneath them. The willingness to key up and say into the night, I am out here too and you are not alone. You can still do that. A word to a stranger. A moment of noticing. A voice that answers when someone needs answering. So pull the blanket up now and find the cool side of the pillow and let your breathing go soft and slow. The road is